Isn't that what the Torah is about? All tradition was?
Good morning. Welcome to Koil Baker.
Good morning.
The sinner of the town. He was the thief. Anytime something went wrong, something was missing, he probably took it, or at least he had a hand in it. And finally decided he's going to do tshuva. He went and he knocked on those doors. He apologized. He asked for forgiveness. He gave back items that he stolen, other stuff he tried to pay back. But then he decided it's not enough. For the rest of his life, he's going to sit and spend an hour in shul every day and say psalms and express the real feeling of his new life and ask Hashem to forgive him for years of this terrible behavior of stealing and so on. And one day he's in shul and he sees the rabbi is also saying Tehillim. So when he came home, he told his wife, he said, I think there will be another thief. Torah is really about tshuva. And Yiddishkeit tells us constantly we have the opportunity to fix the past. We have the opportunity to correct the wrong, even if something was done and it is damaging, through sincerity, through certain steps. We've done many classes on this. You could do tshuva and you'll be forgiven. As long as you're sincere about it, as long as you really resolve not to do it again in the future. There are ways to reverse the past. However, by Moshe Rabbeinu, we find something which is not forgiven. And this in this week's Parsha, because he hit the rock, he doesn't get to go into Eretz Yisrael. And as much as he begs, Hashem doesn't let him in. It's to put it in the words of the Akedas Yitzchak, we have a table, we have meat, and we have a knife, but we have no mouth with which to eat it, which is an expression to say that we get the story, we hear what it says, but how are we supposed to process this? How can we understand this? And commentaries throughout the sages talk about this. What is this concept that Moshe Rabbeinu could somehow not be forgiven for hitting the rock? Now, before we get into that, I just want to say there's a medrash, fascinating medrash, the Tanchuma, not on this parsha, but on Parshas Vayeshev, who quotes the pasuk Neira Alila Al Bnei Adam, and he says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha said that certain negative things that happen to a person, Hashem orchestrates it that it should be that way. In other words, he finds a reason that they should deserve that. But really it was in the plan before. And he gives the example of a person who comes home from work and he asks his wife for a cup of water and she brings him cold water. He says, cold water? I wanted hot water. And he whips out of his pocket a divorce and he says, you're out. So she says, 1 second, how did you know that I'm going to give you cold water, that you prepared in advance the divorce, it's all written and everything? Clearly, you knew that you wanted to divorce me. You were just waiting for the right opportunity. So now you found something to blame it on. But it's not really because of the water. It's my own thing. It's your own idea. You decided you want to do that. And the similar concept we find, the Medrash says, Hashem told Moshe, you're going to see what I'm going to do to F.R.E.E. and to Mitzrayim. But you're not going to see what I'm going to do to the 31 kings. Okay, when they went into Eretz Yisrael, they had to have battles with different kings. Hashem told Moshe, he hinted it to him a long time before. You'll see the defeat over F.R.E.E. You will not see the defeat over the 31 kings.
Foresee.
You're not going to see it. You're not going to experience it.
Oh.
So Hashem told him, that one, you'll be part of the F.R.E.E. one, but you're not going into Eretz Yisrael. Well before the story with the rock, well before the story with the spies. Okay, we found the reason. Now we're going to blame it on this. You, Hashem, have mentioned this a long time ago that he's not going into Eretz Yisrael. So clearly, there's a lot more to the story. And as we go and try to understand Moshe Rabbeinu's reason or the cause why Hashem decided he's not going into Mitzrayim, in Eretz Yisrael, we have to remember that really these reasons are not the real reasons. The real reason is that Hashem had a hidden ta'am, a hidden reason why he didn't want him to go in. But as we learn it, we'll try to apply it to our own lives and take the lessons of what's considered to be faulty in certain things that Moshe Rabbeinu did. Again, not as a cause for him not going into Eretz Yisrael, because clearly this was pre-planned, and there's deep explanations of why Moshe could not be in Eretz Yisrael at that time. The world wasn't ready for it. When Moshe does something, it's eternal. So if he would go in, we'd never have any destruction, and we weren't ready for the eternal situation of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, as far as the Beis Hamikdash is concerned, and so on. So, but be it as it may, the explanations that we'll talk about, let's take it and understand that it's lessons for ourselves, how we should behave. Let's begin with several ideas about Miriam, Moshe Rabbeinu's sister, which really is what brought about this whole story. When she passed away, and they lost the source of water that they had, that's when the whole problem with the water, then the need for water, and hitting the rock, that's when it all started. But there were three people who really led the Jewish people. You had Moshe, of course, Aaron, and Miriam. From the very beginning, Miriam, the reason why she's named Miriam is from the word mar, which means bitter. Because when she was born, the decrees against the Jewish people were starting. We were slaves in Egypt. It was very, very painful and difficult. So her parents called her Miriam, expressing our request to Hashem to get rid of the pain.
So mine.
Yeah. So that's number one. And she was there with the Jewish people. Her existence expressed that empathy and that care for the suffering the Jewish people are going through. Her brother Aaron was born, and he was named Aaron because there was a decree then to throw in Jewish boys into the river. Really, it was all boys for a period of time. And Aaron is the same word as hiroyin, which means pregnancy. So because the difficulty with having children and the terrible punishment that was going on then, the decree rather, that they had to be thrown into the river, so Amram and his wife, they called Amram and Yocheved, they named their son Aaron to express that plight of the Jewish people. And Moshe, I'm sorry, not because of throwing into the river, but because of the decree of the to kill the firstborn, the boys of the children of the Jewish people.
So it came after.
Yeah, no, Hiroyin is pregnancy, but not the throwing into the water. Now Moshe was called Moshe because Minamayim Meshisiu, it's taking out of the water. He was named that, or his name represents that decree of being thrown into the water. But Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, these three, even their names represent the Jewish plight and the suffering and the hardship the Jewish people had in Mitzrayim. Miriam is the bitterness. Aaron is the fighting and the cruelty against having children and trying to kill them as soon as they're born, just after pregnancy. Moshe is when they threw them into the rivers. This whole idea. And this is the what these three people were leading the Jewish people. Now, Miriam has even more than that, as Avi mentioned. It's the idea of water. Miriam has a tremendous chus, a merit. She went and convinced her parents to remarry. They separated because they didn't want to have a son, they'd have to kill him. And she convinced them that you might have a daughter. They had a son, his name was Moshe, but because of what they did, many other families did the same. She also had this chus that her water of the well is what Jewish women used. It was used for a mikvah when they were in the desert. And it's all a result of her championing Jewish families and her championing the need for having children and so on and so forth. So Miriam was the one that because of her, we had throughout our time in the desert, we had the well was a rock that traveled with us. It was a moving well, miraculous. And we had water for all the years basically in the desert. In Moshe's merit, we had man that came from heaven. And in Aaron's merit, we had the clouds that surrounded us, protected us from nature, elements of nature, like hills, mountains, snakes, scorpions, poisonous creatures, and from enemies. If they threw arrows at us, it bounced back. It was a protective shield for us. In addition, we know that the clouds ironed out the clothes of the Jewish people. It cleaned it up and helped it grow with us. It was a miraculous experience during these 40 years, thanks to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. Okay, this is a beautiful story, and this is very optimistic and nice. However, let's go on to the next component. Miriam passes away, and Moshe and Aaron go into the tent to mourn the passing of their sister. And as they're in the tent, they hear a familiar sound. There's a commotion from outside. People are complaining. And unfortunately, the sound is not a good one. And it turns out that rock that was giving water in the merit of Miriam for so many decades is now gone. And there's no water. And the people are starting to complain what's going to be and how are we going to have water and so on and so forth. Hashem told Moshe, take your stick, go, and tell the stone to give water. Okay. Now Rashi tells us that rock of Miriam hid among other rocks. It was hiding, and it had to be told to give water. Well, Moshe comes and he starts to look around for the rock, and he hears people talking. And the Jewish people are starting to murmur, and they're saying, he's going to find a stream, he's going to find a well, and he's going to say, look, I gave you water from a rock. Watch this. He's going to make it as if it's his own miracle. So Moshe Rabbeinu got upset, and he took his stick, and he said, listen, Shimu no hamayrim, listen, rebels. And he hit the rock, give water, hit the rock twice, and water came. And they had water. And everything was great. There's water to drink, everyone's excited. Except, at that moment, Hashem told Moshe and Aaron, both of you are not going into Eretz Yisrael. Okay? 40 years, led the Jewish people, took them out of Mitzrayim, cared for them, literally brought them, I don't know, a mile away from Eretz Yisrael, probably less. And you're not going in, you're going to die here. Why? Because you hit the rock. And Moshe Rabbeinu's greatest desire was to go into Eretz Yisrael. He didn't even get to go into Eretz Yisrael to be buried there, let alone leading them in. He carried Yosef's remains for 40 years in the desert, and according to some opinions, some of the other tribes. And he himself, he can't go in as a living leader. Should be buried there. Nothing. And besides, what did he do already? He hit the rock. He spoke to the rock. Last time you said, hit the rock. 40 years before, Moshe was told, hit the rock. Now it's exactly the opposite. You can hit it. Not only do you not have to hit it, but if you do, we didn't tell him this, but because you did, you're getting punished.
But he hit the rock before.
Yeah, last time he was told to hit it. So that's how you do things. I mean, and he first tried to speak, it didn't work. And he was concerned that the Jewish people are going to start to rebel. And every time they rebel and they say stuff, we get into problems. Right? Hashem gets upset. So you're punishing him for what? Hitting a rock? It's such a terrible sin? To give the Jewish people water?
So Midrashim says that Moshe took upon himself
Yes,
punishment to save the Bnei Israel.
100%. I want to talk a little bit about the explanation of what he did wrong. And again, this was in the plan before. Moshe wasn't going into Eretz Yisrael. So let's look at it more of lessons to ourselves as opposed to faulting Chas v'shalom Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay. There are many prominent commentaries that talk about this, and they give many different answers. There's actually 13 answers to this question. But really, for the most part, the problem is not the hitting the rock. The actual hitting wasn't the issue. The issue was the other elements that went on at the time in Moshe's reaction. Okay, the Rambam, as an example, says in Meir Nevuchim that the problem was kas. He says because Moshe was angry and he expressed himself or reacted with anger, that showed the Jewish people that sometimes you operate out of anger, and it's a very dangerous thing. It's not healthy, it's not safe, it's not a way to operate. Because when a person gets angry, they lose certain clarity, they lose certain abilities to make decisions properly at that time. And the Rambam says the main issue here wasn't the hitting versus the speaking, the main issue was that emotion of anger. And he talks about the importance of a person not getting angry. The Ramban, Nachmanides says, nothing to do with anger. Different problem here. The words of Moshe is Haminasela Noitzi. We will take out water for you. We will take out water, says the Ramban. Who's we? You're taking water. Hashem is giving water. And because you implied with your expression or your choice of words, Noitzi lachem, we, plural, is the cause for Moshe not going into Eretz Yisrael, because that's a lack of dedication or emunah or taking some credit for yourself. It's not really emunah. It's trying to imply that he has a part in this, or that it's him in some way. The Abarbanel says completely different, and he says no. It's got nothing to do. He did nothing wrong here. The problem is Meraglim. The story. Good morning. The problem is the story with the spies. But Torah wants to cover it up, that Moshe Rabbeinu shouldn't be at fault because he wasn't one of the spies. He didn't speak bad about Eretz Yisrael. So he put in this component here saying that it is, we're going to hide it or cast it in a story about a rock. But according to the Barbanel, the rock per se, was nothing wrong here. Hitting was fine. It's not the end of the world. Angry, whatever. It's not. That's what happened.
The other angle is Shimuna Morim. It's Lashon Hara.
We're getting. It's okay. So these are three answers, but I want to talk about a different answer, two other answers, which are very powerful. There's a Gemara in Masechta Tainis, Daf Chav Dalid, which tells us the story. Dalid Amud Aleph. Gemara tells us the story. There was a great Amira, Rav was his name. He came to a certain city that was suffering with a drought. There was no rain for weeks. And the weeks are turning into months, and there's no sign of any moisture. And people are getting very scared. And they decided, as is the prescription for these things, to make a day of prayer. They got together to daven. And they appointed someone to be the chazan. This fellow goes up to be the chazan. And the Gemara says he started to say the word mashiv haruach. Hashem makes the wind to blow. And all of a sudden they heard howling winds outside. And then he said, Meirid HaGeshem. And literally, the guy just says the words. It's almost like he's pushing a button. And Hashem causes rain. The rain is gushing. It's pouring like crazy. So Rav realized this person is not just a simple guy. He must be some either big tzaddik or have a tremendous merit, because to say wind, then instantly you have a response and Hashem answers your tefillah. It's phenomenal. So he went over to him and he says, well, what do you do? And he finds out that he's a teacher of children. Okay, it's a very holy job, important job. How does this give you that merit that when you say wind, Hashem causes it to wind instantly, and when you say rain, it's rain? So he said, I have two things that I do when I teach. Number one, I don't differentiate between the wealthy families and the poor families. I treat the children the same. If someone can't pay tuition, they could still study with me. And the same attention and the same dedication, regardless. Okay, that's number one. And it's a tremendous chus, a merit that I have, and Hashem answers my prayers. Number two, I have in my school, I guess was teaching in his house probably, in my yard I have a fish pond. Fish. And whenever there's a child who is not exactly behaving or not interested in learning, it's children, I don't punish. I tell the child, look, I bribe them. If you're going to listen, if you'll pay attention, if you'll learn, when you're done, you'll get to play with the fish. So because of these two things, I treat the wealthy and the poor equally as far as my students go. And I bribe the kids with rewards, playing with fish or whatever else they had in those times was considered to be recreational activities. That's why Hashem answers the question. Which shows us like this. There's a simple way of education, a common way, and that's forcing a child to do something. What's the basis of education? Okay. What? Motivation. Okay, very good. But the Gemara says like this. Rashi brings in Masechta Sukkah that chinuch katan, Midirabana, what does it mean? You have to be margil. You have to get used to the child. You have to develop habits within the child, train them to have these good habits. Okay? That's really what you're doing as a child. Okay? Or a different Rashi in Chagiga says that it's really all about getting the child into a routine. You're training a child when he's young. Okay? The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch talks about getting up in the morning, right? It says Hamargil Atzmai, the person that gets himself used to in this way 4 or 5 times, it won't be so hard to get up in the morning. You have to just train yourself, get used to it, create a habit, develop that the second nature. But the point is that when it comes to education, a big component of it is habit, training, getting used to it. Okay, you're telling your child to brush their teeth. What's here really is not so important why they're doing it, but you want them to get into a habit that every night, every morning, this is what we do, and then it'll stay with them because it becomes their habit. It becomes what they are. And the same thing is for adults as well. It's about habit. But there's 2 ways to get the child to do it. And a very common way is through threatening, through criticizing, through punishing. If you don't, then you have to, or else you better, right? And you're training them, but you're using certain things that are, let's just say, you're criticizing, you're being harsh, you're threatening, you're punishing. The other way is to motivate. Okay, in Hebrew, the word sheichad, bribery, is made up of 2 words, shehu chad. Rashi brings in Ksubas. Why do you say that sheichad? Why is it so terrible? Because the giver and the receiver, shehu chad, becomes one. That's sheichad. So if you're bribing a judge, you're bribing a lawyer, whatever, the opposite side of the lawyer, the other side, he's becoming one with you, right? He's not impartial anymore. The real way to educate and the real way to motivate is not through criticism, and it's not through threatening and punishment. It's through bribery. I don't mean bribery in a negative sense. It's through positivity. It's through showing the person. And this is the problem. Moshe Rabbeinu hit the rock. By hitting the rock, you expressed that, okay, it's not, yes, but in this explanation, it's not about the anger part. It's sometimes you use force. And Hashem said, the Medrash brings us, Yaakov Shemeni, when the child was very little, and they just came out of Mitzrayim, and the only way to get them to do it, we couldn't even communicate and motivate them. We have to use some discipline. It's okay to hit the rock. It represents you do things because you have to. But now the children have grown up. It's 40 years later. It's the next generation. Don't hit any rocks. Talk. And this is really the problem with what happened with Moshe Rabbeinu not going into Eretz Yisrael. It's not that you hit versus speaking, you anger. There's a stage happening here. And there is an appropriate time, and it does exist for discipline. And maybe when a child is very little and running into the street, you have no choice. You can't start bribing them. Okay? The Jewish people just came out of Mitzrayim. That's what you got to do. But now, 40 years later, they're adults in that sense. You go hit your child, your adult child, because he's not listening to you, he's not looking before he crosses the street. Okay, that's one explanation. There's another explanation, a really beautiful one, which tells us as follows. There's a story. Let's first fix the...
He wants your attention.
Okay. Story says like this. Huh? Hit it? Yeah. About 60 years ago, there was a family, who came from Europe to America. And he was very religious and kept his ways, as difficult as it was. He kept Shabbos, he kept kosher. But unfortunately, his son did not exactly follow in his footsteps. And whatever, he did it for his father. He would show up to some holiday, some stuff. He even enrolled his kid in a afternoon Hebrew program when he had children of his own, but it was not serious. And he wasn't religious, and the grandson altogether was disinterested completely. But before his bar mitzvah, the grandfather made sure that he's prepared, that he's going to have a bar mitzvah. And one day he tells him, I have secured a meeting for you and I to go to the Lubavitcher Rebbe and get a blessing before your bar mitzvah. And you should know, he said, that it's very hard to get a meeting. But I got it for you in honor of your bar mitzvah. And in 2 weeks, on a Tuesday, whatever it was, we're going to go. And the kid was very excited. He's almost 13. His grandfather explained to him how special this is going to be. He came to school. In the playground, he tells his friends, I'm going to see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It's exciting. I'm looking forward. And his friends tell him, 1 second, do you know how this works? Do you know he's going to ask you what you learned? You're not going to know. I'm not sure what you're so happy about. And he's like, whoops, I never thought of that. How could I do that? I'm going to go with my grandfather. He's going to ask me what I'm learning. They had some Judaic studies in the afternoon of some sort, but he was not interested. His parents never encouraged it. So he was, actually, never mind. I'm going to make a fool out of myself. My grandfather will never forgive me. What I need this for? So he told his grandfather, nah, I decided I don't really, no thanks, but no thanks. His grandfather said, you're not going to your bar mitzvah without this. We're going. And he kicked and screamed, and he tried to get out of it, but that night he was there. And they came in for the meeting, and the Rebbe turns to him and he says, what are you learning? So he told him the name. He knew the name of the Masechta, which volume of. The Rebbe asked him a question, not on the Gemara, on the Talmud they were learning, but on the Mishnah, which, let's say, it's easier. And he asked him the first Mishnah, which the first day of school most kids pay attention. And he knew it. And the Rebbe was very impressed. And the Rebbe said, very good. And what about this? And he asked him another question. Random. And a third. And every one of the questions, which were from the beginning, and it was relatively the simpler side of it, and so on. And the kid walked out. And his grandfather is so proud. And he says, I knew you were smart, but I didn't know you were such a genius. What the Rebbe did for this kid, and it's a tremendous story. You could talk about the Rebbe's Ruach HaKodesh, his divine wisdom, and he sees, he understands what the child's going through and his fears and whatever else. But really what he's doing is he's taking a positive component of the child and building on that.
Reinforcing.
Yes, reinforcing it. He's not ignoring it. He's taking a small thing, it's the Mishnah, it's the first Mishnah, the very beginning, and you build on it. Okay? And now the child comes out, his grandfather's excited, he thinks he's great. I heard another story recently, a similar story about, it was on maybe Living Torah, or it's printed up somewhere. It was one of the videos that Jem gave out before Gimel Tammuz. The story is about a fellow whose mother took him to the Rebbe because he was so misbehaving and so terrible. And the Rebbe asked him, are you a good kid? And he said, no. Do you like learning? He said, no. Do you listen to your mother? He said, no. He's like really brazen.
He's also very...
So the Rebbe looks at the mother and says, wow, such an honest kid. He says the emes. And somehow, all of a sudden he felt really good. Point is, you take the positive component and you build on it. The problem with Moshe Rabbeinu's interaction with the rock is he said, Shimu no hamoirim, listen up, rebels. That Hashem said is a problem. Don't call my kids rebels. There's a problem, there's an issue, they're complaining, fine. But you're not going to be successful if you're going to take the negative part and now address them rebels. That's not going to work. And that's how the Evan Ezra explains this. That the whole thing was go to Mitzrayim, Moshe and Aaron, and take them out of Mitzrayim. Okay? Don't call, the Medrash says, it says literally these words. Vayitzavim al b'nei Yisrael, says the Chumash, command them. What did Hashem command them about the Jewish people? He commanded Moshe and Aaron, al tikru lebanai meirim, don't call my kids rebels. Okay? This was 40 plus years before. Or almost 40 years.
Positive reinforcement.
Correct. And now they use that word meirim. Okay? And Hashem said, all I wanted, my whole thing was, don't call them rebels. And you just did. So the idea, the commandment is pick up the Jewish people, lift them, motivate them, even if they're wrong. Don't use that terminology. And that's really our job, our purpose is to motivate, to elevate, to encourage, even when there's a problem. There's a beautiful story that happened with Rabbi Weinberg. Oh, Shalom, you know, if you saw the lessons in Tanya, there's a class. It was translated by his son. It should be well, but the actual shiurim were given by him. He used to give it on the radio. The Rebbe reviewed his classes, his notes. In any case, he once needed to ask the Rebbe a bracha for a friend of his. He would raise money for the yeshiva, and he had a supporter that called him in the middle of the night. There was a problem, an emergency. He needed a bracha from the Rebbe. So he ran to 770 to ask. But the secretary that went into the Rebbe's room the last time of the day to give him the request, the notes, and so on, had already entered. He just missed him. So now we would have to wait till the morning to ask the Rebbe for the bracha, and it was an emergency. So he decided he'll stick the note under the door, and when the secretary turns around after talking to the Rebbe to leave, he'll find that note and he'll give it to the Rebbe. But the secretary didn't notice it. It was on the floor, and he walked out. And then he realized, hey, what did I just do? I'm going to cause the Rebbe to bend down and pick up a note. At some point, the Rebbe is going to get up and see it. So the next day, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe apologizing profusely. I'm sorry for causing you to have to bend down and whatever. The Rebbe answered very simple. My whole purpose, my whole point is to lift up. What are you apologizing, causing me to lift up? The whole thing is lifting up. Instead of criticizing, let's encourage. Even when something is wrong, something is not the way it's supposed to be, whether it's with children, which we talk about education, whether it's adults, whether it's relationships, there's two methods. And the more secure and the way Hashem wants us to behave, and the much more effective method is positivity, encouragement, motivation. Thank you. Have a wonderful Shabbos.
I've got a few comments.
Please.
So originally,